The agistic eccentric contraction approach. Agistic eccentric contraction is one of the basic methods used by Brugger, in which alternating concentric and eccentric contraction of antagonistic muscle groups takes place. The goal is to achieve functional synergism, or to reduce functional antagonism. In this way, muscle length and/or hypertonicity is influenced. The technique is always applied in the erect position and can be divided into two phases. 1. Active movement without resistance performed by shortened antagonistic muscle groups, by which we mean antagonists to muscles which are shortened. During this movement, the shortened muscle is lengthened. 2. Eccentric contraction against manual resistance applied to the antagonists of the shortened muscle group. Agistic eccentric contraction to influence shortened muscle length or hypertonicity of finger flexors while standing. With the patient in the correct standing position, the therapist stabilizes the wrist with one hand in slight dorsiflexion and places his other hand in the dorsal aspect of the patient's fingers. In the first phase, the patient performs extension and abduction of the fingers actively and without external resistance. In phase 2, the therapist flexes the fingers while the patient resists. Thus, eccentric contraction of the finger extensors occurs. Agistic eccentric contraction procedure to influence shortened muscle length or hypertonicity of the wrist flexors while standing. We start with the patient in an erect standing position. The therapist supports the patient's forearm with one hand, with the other on the dorsal aspect of the patient's hand. In phase 1, the patient performs extension of the wrist actively without external resistance. In phase 2, the therapist performs wrist flexion which the patient resists. Thus, the eccentric contraction of wrist extensors occurs. Exercises with a TheraBand. In Brugger's concept, TheraBand exercises are an integral part of the comprehensive program, in particular as self-treatment. Mostly, the white and yellow light resistance bands are used. The main goals of the TheraBand exercises are improvement of coordination achieved by alternation of eccentric and concentric muscle contraction adjusted by the degree of resistance of the band, reduction of functional shortening of overused muscles, improvement of kinesthetic sense, dynamic muscle strengthening, and helping to start an early self-treatment program. The performance of an exercise can be divided into two phases. 1. Active resisted movement, to activate muscle groups which are anatomical antagonists to the muscles which are shortened. During this movement, the shortened muscle is lengthened. And 2. Eccentric contraction of that muscle group which is the anatomical antagonist of the shortened muscles resisted by the TheraBand. Performing this movement, the patient resists the direction of the tension of the TheraBand. The speed of this second phase should be half that of the first phase. TheraBand exercises to improve function of the thigh adductors and plantar flexors and supinators of the foot. First, the TheraBand is applied as shown. Phase 1. Starting in an erect, correct sitting position, the patient performs hip abduction and dorsal flexion and pronation of the foot actively. The movement is resisted. In Phase 2, the patient resists movement against the tension of the TheraBand. This means hip adduction and plantar flexion and supination of the foot. Great combined exercises with a TheraBand. The goal of this exercise is to achieve optimal posture and movement patterns. First, the TheraBand is applied as shown, then we start in the erect, correct sitting position. In Phase 1, the patient actively performs dorsal flexion and pronation of the foot, hip abduction, external rotation of the shoulder, supination of the forearm, and extension of the elbow. Movement is resisted. In Phase 2, the patient resists movement against the direction of the tension of the TheraBand, giving us plantar flexion and supination of the foot, hip adduction, internal rotation of the shoulder, pronation of the forearm, and flexion of the elbow.